So today I want to talk a little bit about the current pro meta and kind of pro play in general and why I think it's becoming quite boring to watch. This has happened many times in the past in competitive play, but I think now, especially in today's meta and with what champions are currently being picked often, I think pro play is getting pretty stale for me, and I want to talk about the reason why. So when we first started out this summer season, it was a really fresh meta, especially inside of the jungle, with AP junglers making a huge resurgence with Brand and Zyra and Karthus and champions like this, and it was really fresh and it was really interesting because we were so used to, the tanks in the jungle with Maokai and Sedge, and then the fighters with the Viegos and the Xin Zhaos and things like that. So it was a really fresh jungle meta, which was refreshing to see, to say the least. And then we transitioned pretty recently into the marksman solo lane meta, where it was primarily Tristana and Corki at first, and then it started to be the Ezreals and the Zerries and some Smolder now being flexed all over the map, and marksman really took over the meta. And now it's at the point where that's really all that's being picked. Occasionally, like this game in DK vs Fox Game 1, we get something crazy like Showmaker playing Nasus mid lane, which is absolutely insane, which is really, really cool to see, actually. But largely, in most games I see, it's really the same small group of champions being picked every single game. And I've said this in the past, where pro players and pro teams pretty much find champions that they think are good, that they think are quote-unquote strong in the meta, and they only stick to picking those champions. And I think that's the primary reason that pro play becomes boring after a while, is because outside of that commonly accepted group of meta champions, there's no diversity, there's no draft creativity, and there's no utilization of the 160 something champions that's in League of Legends. They just stick to that group of, give or take 30 to 40 plus champions that they think are strong in the current meta. So I want to give you a current example in terms of meta mid laners right now. Let's take mid lane for an example. Commonly selected meta mid laners, really nice rel engage there, by the way. Commonly accepted mid lane picks in the meta right now would include Corki, would include Smolder, Zeri for marksman, and then you have the common things like Azir, maybe the occasional Orianna, but that's not really meta. But largely the mid lane meta is just marksman and then Azir and maybe a few others thrown in there. But what I think should be the case is that you utilize all of the champions in League of Legends and say what fits in terms of our theme style comp, and we can pick a lot of different champions that fit that same theme instead of just sticking to the same pool of characters. If you wanted to pick Azir, for example, a long range, really hyper scaling, really good scaling mid laner that can control team fights really well. Well, there are other champions that fit that same mold that are different, so you don't have to pick Azir every single time. Things like the Seraphine, Lux, Anivia is really, really strong. So many champions are really good and really pickable in competitive play, but they just don't pick them. Maybe because they're not comfortable on a champion, maybe because they tried it in scrims and lost, so they don't think it's good. Whatever reason it might be, there's no draft diversity like this. Even though there are so many champs to pick from, pro players just stick with what they think is strong in the currently accepted meta. And it's the same thing with things like itemization. Pro players believe that Static Shiv is really strong on marksman, so they build it every single game and never go away from that. Even though itemization is a completely dynamic aspect of League, like drafting, you can't do the same thing every single game and expect to win. You have to adapt to your own team, to the enemy team, and your own specific needs inside of that game. It's dynamic. It changes from game to game. You can't do the same. You can't build the same items, and you can't pick the same champions every game and expect to win at least consistently. Another really nice rel engage, by the way. This guy's smurfing on that. Anyways, it's really unfortunate to see, and this is the primary reason why I think pro play is becoming quite stale for me and quite boring, and I'm really hoping that Riot makes some significant changes before Worlds. I'm really hoping the Worlds patch is significant and that we get some sort of change up inside of the meta, because especially recently, Riot has only been changing the game for competitive play. They've nerfed the marksman role in general 2 patches in a row now, because marksmen have been taking over pro play completely, when in solo queue, ADC role is less than strong, to say the least. But it's like, if you look at this game 2 draft here, you have Corki in the mid lane and you have Zeri in the mid lane. There are so many other champions that can be picked, and they just stick to what they think is strong. I'm not saying that those champions aren't strong in solo lanes. I've actually believed that marksmen in solo lanes have been strong for much longer than they've been played in this meta. But there's so many champions that you can play, but there's so little creativity in draft diversity. I know that pro play is competition, and at its core they're trying their best to win the game, so you should pick what's strongest, and that currently is Corki in the mid lane. I'm just saying, if I want to be engaged consistently as a fan in pro play, there needs to be something to spice it up, something to relieve the constant Cassante Renekton matchups and the marksman in the mid lane and the tank engaged supports. These things are picked every single game, and there's no going away from that. There's no outside picks, and it's getting quite boring to watch. It happened the same thing last year with the Lucian Nami bot lanes, and the year before that with the ranged support bot lanes with the Heimerdingers and the Ashes and the Callista supports. While it starts out really cool and fresh, after a while, it just becomes super stale because that's all that's being played. Same thing in the current top lane meta. You see Cassante, you see Renekton, and you see Rumble. That's pretty much it. And I will say, Rumble's really the only great champion out of those 3. Cassante's okay, Renekton's useless. And it's the same thing with the jungle meta now. It's fast farming AP junglers. I saw one Evelynn pick, and there probably have been some, but I haven't seen any Fiddlesticks picks. They just stick to the same pool of champs, even though Fiddlesticks is a completely broken champion. But, they probably lost with it in scrims once, so they think it's trash. It's really unfortunate, the lack of creativity, the lack of diversity, the lack of being willing to try new things. That's really what scrims and practice is for. When people in competitive go into scrims, trying their hardest to win, sure, I guess you want to win in practice, but the purpose of practice is to try new things, become more flexible as a team, and become stronger as a team overall. And I think that being more creative and more flexible in draft is a really big part of being stronger as a team that people just don't look at in competitive play. It's really unfortunate, and it's really creating kind of a lull in pro play for me, becoming quite bored with such repetitive picks every single game. Thanks for watching. See you next time.